All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and let a few more people out of the waiting room.
If you hear this message, it means that I'm not available. And please leave your name, number, and the reason of calling. Thank you, and have.
I think that we're probably gonna leave an hour-long voice message for this person. All right, welcome back to Core 170. Like I was saying, I think today is a pretty easy day. So I think we'll start the way we're gonna start every class period, which is just, does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns before we begin? All right, cool. So moving forward, today you all had a reading assignment. You were supposed to read the Introduction to Expecting Better. It's fine if you don't have the book yet because the PDF was on Canvas. And we're really just going to discuss this introduction today. There's no formal lecture, it's a discussion section. I'm gonna be leaning heavily on you all, in part just so I can start to get to know you all better. So let's have a volunteer. Who wants to summarize this reading for us? It was only a couple pages long. And when you chime in, be sure to introduce yourself.
Hi, Cam.
Right.
I'm Sita, and what I understood at least was that it's about the data collecting process that this author did during her pregnancy because she disliked all of the answers that were given to her, and she didn't like that she didn't have options or any knowledge about why the answers were the way that they were. So her process of collecting data and then making decisions for herself.
Right, and great answer. Thank you, Sita. Anyone have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah.
So Lily first, and then I heard someone else.
Okay. So going off what you said, I thought it was really interesting. Other than that premise, which she gave us, she said that she tried to look at it from the perspective of just buying a house or making decisions in that way that she normally does, and almost everything in that system just like tried to mess that system up for her. So she found out it was so much harder than she would originally find to sort through misinformation and make her own decisions. So that was part of the reason she wanted to write the book.
Right, I think I heard another voice chime in. Did someone else want to add something?
Yes, hello, my name is Cindy Bradford. It also explored the steps of good decision making. The first one was the right data, and the second one was to weigh the costs and balances. And that proved very useful in her pregnancy because she did not like the way her doctors were approaching it and made her make good decisions.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you all three of you for sharing. I'll add to that, sort of the inside baseball here is Emily Oster, as I say in the syllabus, is not only great at what she does as an economist, excellent at science communication. So her COVID website is top notch if anyone wants to check it. In fact, I'll drop it into the chat for you all to see at your own pace. But on top of all those things is someone who just absolutely loves coffee. And so when she got pregnant, everyone was telling her, well, you can't drink coffee when you're pregnant. And she kept saying, why? And people are like, oh, it's not good for the baby. And she would say, why? What does not good for the baby mean? Does it mean stunted growth? Does it mean, hindered development? Does it mean nothing at all? And she was really inspired to dive into what the academic literature said and not only decide for herself, but also relay that information to everyone else.
Well, and it was an eye-opener for me. Because,
yeah, and introduce yourself really quick.
This is Cynthia. But it was an eye-opener for me because I feel like she's probably one of the first people to question what the doctors say about a woman's pregnancy. So I thought it was really cool because I hadn't really ever heard of someone questioning it besides the, what do you mean I can't have coffee?
Right. And just to echo that, Madison in the chat said she hopes that people use this information in the future when making decisions, but also while the person is pregnant, so they can understand the data behind many of the different procedures and theories that many people believe in. Thank you for adding that to the chat. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing. So yeah, this all started sort of because Emily Oster was pregnant and loved coffee and really wanted to, why she shouldn't drink coffee. And eventually, I don't even know if we have the coffee chapter scheduled. You'll see from the syllabus, we kind of bounce around because I'm more interested in the types of data she's using to make those decisions than the actual, you know, lifespan of the pregnancy, which is how the book is organized. What it came down to is the stress that is being put on her body by not drinking coffee is way more damaging to the fetus than any moderate amount of caffeine is. So with that in mind, let's move past the summary. What did you all think of this introductory chapter?
Hi,
Um,
wait. Oh, will you mute yourself? Sorry, Peyton and I. No. Wait, I don't know why it's doing that. Oh no, it's just because I can hear it. Sorry, Peyton and I are roommates, and she has it over there. Sorry about that.
You're welcome to join the call together if you want.
Okay, we might do that in the future, but so sorry, I completely lost my train of thought.
It's fine.
I really loved that she. Sorry, someone else just go because I completely forgot what I was gonna say.
Right. So who's next? What do you all think of this introductory chapter?
I'm Kaya, by the way.
Okay.
I got personally really excited to read it because when you said we were going to read a book about pregnancy, I was like, oh goodness, oh gosh. But I really like her tone throughout the first chapter. It's really easy to read. It's amiable. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it. It's not scary at all.
All right. Yeah, and Kaya, to sort of tie together what you were saying with what Cynthia was saying earlier, one of the things that really struck me when I was reading it is the fact that not only can there be this, amiable, well-communicated tone, but the fact that these data-based decisions, and that's what they are, and we'll get into this as class goes on, but when I say data, all I mean is information, making decisions with information. The fact that these data-based decisions haven't really been communicated before, and especially an area like pregnancy, which is, on the one hand, so scientific, has been mostly dominated by sort of rumor and suspect and things that aren't necessarily validated by that scientific literature. We've got a message in the chat. Christina Smith said she really liked the casual tone of the introduction and made it easier to read, more so than a traditional textbook. She liked how you can use data throughout your life, but in practical situations, and liked how the data applied to statistics and analysis and helps us to make informed decisions. Anyone else? What did the rest of you think? Ray first, and then whoever was after that.
I just liked how it was kind of like relatable in a sense because like I haven't experienced pregnancy, but she did mean like bring in like the SpongeBob thing, if that makes like SpongeBob lowers your IQ. Because I remember in middle school, I think my mom was like, "You're not allowed to watch SpongeBob anymore," but she wouldn't tell us why. So it was kind of interesting to see like how it kind of pertains to the same thing. And my mom didn't question why we couldn't watch either. She was like, "You guys are in school, you need to focus on your schoolwork," and stuff like that. So it was kind of interesting to look at it from her perspective.
Right, excellent point. What about the rest of you?
I'm Vicky. I thought it was really interesting, especially when she started going into how few studies have actually been done on pregnancy, but then how many doctors will tell you, no, you can't do that because there's data on it, but there's really nothing on it.
Right, and with that in mind, we're not reading her other books in this class, but Crib Sheet, which is her next book and all about post-pregnancy, so young kids and toddlers, becomes even less scientific in the sense of what people are telling you. screen time for kids, or whether or not you should breastfeed or use formula. Or it just becomes people on Facebook yelling at you without really having the data to back those decisions up. And a lot of what you see in child studies and in pregnancy studies focuses on things like long-term health and long-term survival. But one of the things that becomes very clear, and why we need good data-based decision-making methods, is we don't have as much information for short-term effects. Someone else?
Yeah, if I could pipe in about something. I thought it was really cool, especially, I think it was towards the end, where she said that she and her friend had looked up at the same data. I think it was for drinking coffee, and she came to the conclusion that it was fine to drink coffee, or maybe it was the wine, I can't remember. But then her friend looked at the same data and said she didn't want to drink coffee, and I just thought that was very interesting of how like open to interpretation it is, and how she didn't come across as like judgmental of that difference in not opinion, I guess, but difference in conclusion in the writing, which I thought was really cool.
Right. Thank you, Riley. Excellent point. And what I wanted to get to from that is really all the data does is provide us information. But at the end of the day, it's up to us as leaders for how we use that information. And certainly, you know, what Emily Oster tries to do is present a method for making decision making. But part of that method is really, at the end, respecting our agency, and we get to make our own choices. A side note from that, I said at the beginning that she's really good at science communication. In the chat, I dropped in her COVID website if anyone wants to take a look at that, you know, on their own time. So let's have some pushback. Is there anyone who sort of didn't like the reading, or maybe thought it was inappropriate? You know, this is, after all, a pregnancy book. It is a sort of more, you know, I guess, not the topic you might have thought you were going to start with when you signed up for this class, and not the topic that you might have had if this was one of Dr. Loftus's Core 170 classes. So is there any pushback? Is there anyone who thought this maybe is not appropriate for a data-based decision-making class, or not appropriate for a Sweetbriar class, or just didn't like the reading, appropriateness aside?
Hi, my name is Lily.
Hi, Lily.
I just took Principles of Microeconomics, and there was a Planet Money podcast that we would listen to, and one of the episodes had, I don't know if it's the same lady, but they did talk about like from an economical or economist standpoint, pregnancy tips and like what they've been told not to do, the same thing that she sums up in her book. So I think it, like, even though you might not see how it's similar at first, reading through and seeing how they take the actual data to say to the problems with pregnancy, I think it's a really good topic to use in this class.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Anyone else? Either you know, thoughts on the reading so far, or pushback against it?
Hi, I'm Annika. I just wanted to add that I thought it was almost like comical, to kind of go off what Ray said. The idea that some of us grew up hearing that, oh, SpongeBob isn't good, your kids shouldn't watch it. And then to read that, and just not only the introduction itself, but to be able to see later on, like, this is how, you know, not everybody views things the same way, and that we hear these things every single day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're true.
Right. So Annika, Lily, Riley, let's try and tie together some of the things you were saying, which is, you know, what is this method that she presents for decision making? And really, Lily, let's take what you saw in Econ 101, where we start from, everyone has preferences, you know, preferences over good. Some people like Coke, some people like Pepsi. And what we do in you know, with this method of decision making is take those preferences and then weigh the cost and benefits. So let's throw out a straw man example. Suppose SpongeBob really is bad for you. Suppose it does lower your IQ. If you really like SpongeBob, if the amount of happiness it gives you, if the joy it gives you is really, really high, it might still be worth it to watch it, even if it is bad for you on the back end. And again, like I said, this is just a completely made up false example, right? But in respecting people's agency as decision makers, we also have to understand that they're weighing the costs and benefits. We have a message in the chat from Jaden. I thought towards the beginning that you didn't like how she was comparing a pregnancy to purchasing a company. Yeah, excellent point, right? Some of these things that we're going to be reading about are very, very personal decisions, and it can be sort of off-putting to read them in sort of clinical or even, you know, benign terms. But you say once she applies it to general life, you started to enjoy it more. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Thank you, Jaden, for your point. Hi, Elizabeth.
Jaden inspired me with her comment. I really like that it's applied to personal decisions, because I think those are the decisions that sometimes we can tend to make more emotionally rather than logically. And sometimes when you make a really emotional decision, you'll end up regretting it later because it might not be the best long-term decision. So I think presenting this in something that is, I think for most of us, pregnancy is both like sort of familiar, but like from like far, like a little bit far away. So it's a great example because it's not something that most of us have experience with firsthand. So we can look at it a little bit more as like an outsider, but we also know it's a very personal, can be emotional decision. So I think because we have that model, it will be easier for us to translate these skills to our personal lives.
Right, and Elizabeth, let me take this opportunity to say something I mentioned when we went over the syllabus on Monday, but bears repeating. If anyone is uncomfortable with the pregnancy book, either in and of itself or any of the specific chapters, you know, there are some content warnings that we should be aware of. Please come speak to me separately, and we can come up with alternative ways for you to participate in the class. But yeah, like this is something that is, on the one hand, very, very close to all of us. At the very least, we were all born. Some of us might have kids in the future, either through pregnancy or other means. But on the other hand, is also something that in a lot of ways feels unfamiliar. None of us have been to med school. You know, we don't know some of the more scientific aspects of this, even though it's our job as people and as future leaders to make these decisions. So we've got two messages in the chat, one from Juliet. It's a good way to look at the way opinions can differ even when information doesn't, and how we have to make decisions based on that. Excellent point. And Jaden likes her advice to find the information on your own and then make your own decision based on it. So I think that's an excellent point, Jaden. But one of the pushbacks to that, and I say this gently, is we're not all scientists. We're not all, none of us are medical doctors. So finding this information can be sort of difficult and somewhat hard to digest, hard to distinguish between what's good information and what's bad information. One of the things we're hoping to do in this class, and we'll be addressing this on Friday, is what is this process of science and how are they getting this information to us? You'll also talk about this more in your Core 160 classes, those of you who have had it or are going to take it in the future. So thank you, Jaden, Juliet, and Elizabeth for sharing. Anything else? Anyone want to add?
I also, with the SpongeBob example, I liked that she really drove home the point about like it's not necessarily the thing that they've picked to research that is actually causing what they have decided it causes. And that I think that is very interesting. And that there's always more happening outside of the single thing that we've picked out to look at.
Yeah, because that's the thing, like an experiment's only perfect if you have one changing variable. If, like with the alcohol example, you can't rule out alcohol because a lot of them were doing cocaine or some, like whatever it was. So you can't really rule out either of them because they're used in combination.
Right, excellent point. And you both emphasize something that I wanted to underscore today, which is in your emails to me, some of you have expressed some concern about you know, familiarity with math. But what we're doing when we make decisions in a data-driven world is not about the math per se. It's about exactly what you two are identifying right now, which is we can think about what is changing in a model, what is changing in a situation, and try and identify causes and effects from that. So Cynthia, to your point, where a lot of the early fetal alcohol studies were done on babies that had been exposed to crack and cocaine, we, without looking at the math, know that there are multiple causes there and can comment on our failure to distinguish or tease out the effects of those causes. Ashley says in the chat, a general observation, but pregnancy is an interesting way to introduce the concept of decision making. I agree. And she said there are many different ways the author could have introduced pregnancy, or could have introduced decision making, but she chose pregnancy, which is very thought provoking. Thank you. Actually, I tend to agree. Dara says that she likes the comparison of purchasing a company to having a baby because both are life-changing events. Even after pregnancy, a woman's body is still affected. She thinks the book is a good read for class because it shows you that you should question things. Right, so earlier when I said, some people may be put off by sort of this clinical approach to personal decision-making. If you're not put off by it, great. I tend to think that this approach to decision-making is very powerful, even if it's upsetting to you, but if it's not upsetting, certainly don't go looking for it. Emily says something that stuck out was the busts and booms that came along with decisions, like in the housing crisis, or the fact that millennials might be experiencing a baby bust right now. Yeah, so when we make decisions with data, we have to use those data to take into account the information we already know. 50% of people who did this, experienced such and such event. But we also have to use that data, those information, to project out into the future. So if you buy a house now, what will happen if, the housing market crashes? Do you still want to live in that house? Will it still be, valuable to you? Sydney says, I liked how she made the point that every good or bad decision is made by weighing the costs and benefits. And that's really sort of the method for decision making we're talking about. In Sydney's opinion, good decisions should always be weighed with the knowledge that some bad consequences may appear. And data helps us determine, in many cases, the consequences, both good and bad. Excellent point. So Sydney, I want to tie that back into what we were talking about earlier, where when we make these decisions, we have to weigh, I think, 4 things. One is the data, the information we have. One is our personal preferences. And then what falls out of those preferences are the costs and benefits. So Lara says, how do you know what the right way to weigh the pluses and minuses are in general? Also, what is amniocentesis? Amniocentesis is a prenatal procedure that involves sticking a large needle into the womb to analyze the amniotic fluid. It used to be much more popular in pregnancy than it is now. You can get, genetic information from the baby and stuff like that. And the question is, if you're sticking a big needle into the womb, will the baby be harmed? And what benefits do you get out of the test that you can conduct with that fluid afterwards? So your 2 questions are actually put together quite well. What's the plus of such a test? You get a lot more information. You get data on the fetus, on your future baby. What is the minus? You could harm either the mother or the child in the process. So let's tie those to your question about what is the right way to weigh these pluses and minuses. It comes down to the 2 things we've been talking about. 1, your personal preferences, and 2, your agency, your ability to make decisions for yourself. And you might weigh costs and minuses, or I should say costs and benefits, different than someone else. That's fine. The important thing is that we're all starting from the same starting point of what the data are telling us about, for instance, amnia.
Hi, I'm Peyton. I just wanted to say that kind of reminded me. She made a comment when she was saying being pregnant kind of reminded her of being like a baby, a child, because there were all these list of rules that she could and couldn't do. And so I thought that was interesting how she tied those 2 together, being pregnant felt like she like was a child again or baby.
Right, exactly. Do this, don't do that, which is, I imagine very frustrating to any adult, but specifically adult whose whole career is about making decisions.
I'm the other Lily, but going off of that, I thought it was really interesting when she talked about the comparison between like buying a house and having a baby, that if the realtor acted the same way the doctors were towards her, she would have instantly fired them. But because that is the maternity system, it just keeps going with no repercussions.
Right, exactly. So, and thank you for sharing that. I want to switch gears a little bit. Is what she presented in this introductory chapter, starting from your preferences, examining the information, weighing costs and benefits, and then ultimately making a decision. Is that consistent with how you all have been making decisions in your lives up to this point? And if so, why or why not?
For me, I feel like to a point, yes. Because we all naturally, I think, want to weigh the pluses and minuses in any decision. She talked a lot about like you have to pay off. Like before buying a house, is the other house better? I mean, that's a really easy comparison. So I think we naturally want to do that, but when decisions try to become out of our hands, like someone's trying to make them for us, or are a little too emotional, then our decision making likes to go out the window a little bit.
Right. So with that, Christina in the chat says it depends on the situation. Some decisions are naturally emotional, and sometimes it's hard to find data or analyze those data, and that definitely plays on your decision-making process. What about the rest of you? Is this consistent with the way you've been making decisions in your lives?
I think it kind of is. I feel like when it comes to like bigger things, like well, I don't call them like minuses, like pros and cons is basically what I would classify it as. And I feel like you do it when you're making like large sum decisions, so like things that you would consider life changing. Because I feel like she was doing it with something minuscule, like can she drink coffee? Like not minuscule, but like can I giving up caffeine for the child? That's what like her scale is. But I feel like I only do it when there's like a big picture involved. So like if I have to, what school am I going to? What major am I gonna declare? Like things like that. Rather than like, am I gonna have a waffle? Am I gonna have a pancake? Like some things just come naturally, and it depends on how you're feeling, like Christina said. So.
Right, excellent point. Thank you, Ray Ray. And I think what some of the economists or some of the state of the science would tell us is that even those small decisions like waffles or pancakes, you're still weighing the costs and benefits. It's just something you're so familiar with that it happens instantaneously. You don't really have to stop and be reflective of it. We've got a couple comments in the chat. First from Jaden. I feel like to a point, but it was more of what you feel is right. You don't always consider the data as much as you should. And sometimes if you want something, you might ignore data that you don't like or that doesn't speak to your conclusion. So that I think is really interesting and something that we're going to see other people do as well as the semester goes on. Juliet also says it depends on the decisions. Consider the pros and cons less of getting a tattoo than moving to a different place and considering the where and why. Juliet, are you comfortable diving into that a little bit further? Why did you choose these two examples, for instance? And if you don't want to share further, that's fine.
No, I'll go ahead and share. So between the two of them, while that may not be the best example because I know the former is permanent, I can choose and, kind of mitigate where I put it. I could have it somewhere you wouldn't ever see. However, moving to a place, I'd have to consider other things like, what's the current economic status of the area? Is this a place where I can find jobs correctly? Would I even be in a safe area at all? It takes a lot more bigger considerations in the mind than just where the placement may be.
All right, excellent point. And to that point, a lot of the decisions, particularly in the, when I'm moving, are decisions that we need to approach from a database perspective. So you mentioned safety of the neighborhood. There are crime statistics we can look up. You mentioned cost of living. That sounds like data to me. You mentioned, what the jobs are like in the area. That sounds like data to me. And to just emphasize something that we said earlier in the lecture, but also that we'll be talking about as the semester goes on, all we mean when we say data is information. And a word like data, it sounds so scientific, it sounds so clinical, it can be kind of scary, but we all have information. And it's something we're constantly collecting, constantly thinking about, constantly commenting on. And really what we want to do in Core 170 is sort of peel back some of what makes data scary and think about it more in terms of information informing your decision. What about the rest of you? Is this idea of information, preferences, cost, benefits, and agency consistent with how you've made decisions in the past?
I think with similar to pros and cons, economically speaking, you have to think of like the trade-offs, maybe like for you personally, or if it's like a group decision, but you have to consider the trade-offs. If you could be doing something with your time, but you're deciding to do that thing.
Right, excellent, Peyton. Thank you so much. And that gets to sort of the final point I wanted to talk about today, which is when we think about decision making in this process, there are some, logical truisms that fall out of it. One, like you mentioned, is a trade-off, right? If there are costs to everything, if there are benefits to everything, there is necessarily a trade-off that we're making. I'm paying these costs to gain these benefits. That's true of pregnancy, that's true of house buying, that's true of waffles versus pancakes. But the other thing that's sort of hidden behind all that is when we make these choices, it implies there were other choices we could have made. And that's what in economics, and those of you who have had my econ classes or some of my other core classes, we call an opportunity cost, right? So by choosing waffles, we are inherently not choosing pancakes. We're giving up one thing for the other. Jennifer says, you tend to overthink and stress about decisions you make, and it can probably affect you more as you navigate life. You also agree that many decisions are based on emotions, like Ray choosing a school. You chose Sweetbriar because you felt comfortable and didn't start to think about the differences for coming to a new culture and a new state and everything else that comes with it. Right, so tying together those 2 points, in choosing to come to Sweetbriar, you guys are not at UVA right now, right? In choosing one, you are giving up other things. And Sita mentions how these decisions and the information we have in making these decisions is affected by other sources, marketing and branding. So let's sort of take what Jennifer was saying about how you might overthink decisions. Let's take what Sita was saying about how the information we have when we make decisions might be influenced from other sources. How can we avoid some of this stress? How can we make it so the decisions we're making as individuals, as leaders, aren't negatively affecting us, I should say. Do any of you have any strategies you rely on?
Well, for me, I often try to look at all the information available to me, and that kind of helps me kind of break down the big decision that I'm trying to make.
Excellent point. Jaden echoes that point by saying considering all the data. What about the rest of you?
This is a very specific case for me, but I've quickly realized when it comes to books, I get very emotional about buying more books. So to stop that, I give my boyfriend my wallet so I can't buy books.
Excellent point. So let's take that decision and explore, what we know about decision making with that, right? So it sounds like you have a strong preference for books, right? In buying a book, that's money that you're not spending on savings or coffee or whatever. You get the benefit of having a new book, great. It costs you money. It also, if you're talking about physical books, it costs you space. One of the strategies you've come up with to sort of avoid incurring those costs is taking away your agency, giving someone else your wallet. are there other things we can consider? So is the problem just one of money? If it's one of space, where you don't have any more room on the bookshelf, can we consider something like ebooks or digital books? If it's can we consider something like library books or a book club where you're sharing with all your friends, right? So certainly there's preferences at play, there's costs and benefits, but there's also a lot of other opportunities in the realm of this decision making regarding books. Excellent example. Thank you, Cynthia.
I think one strategy to avoid the emotional decision making would be counting somehow quantifying your preference for the situation. So if you have two options and you would really like to do one, but it might not be the most responsible decision, if you count, oh, well, I really want to do this as like one pro or maybe two pros, then if the cons still outweigh the pros in this situation, then you have known that you've taken into consideration that you want to do it, but maybe it's still not the best decision.
Excellent point. Anyone else? All right, yeah, so like I said, oh, sorry, Juliet mentioned in the chat, I try and recognize what anxieties are causing the feeling of being overwhelmed and focus directly on finding information relevant to the anxiety. So for instance, if Juliet is anxious about rent prices, then do some research into the area and what the cost of living is there. And maybe even expanding that search into, what the job market is like. So, rent prices are obviously much higher, say, in New York City or San Francisco, but so is the average wage. Excellent point. So sort of, like I said at the beginning, this should have been a pretty easy day. I hope you all enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. But just to sort of tie it all together, here we have this person who is experiencing a really emotional and life-changing event. She is deciding whether or not to have a baby, and within that comes a whole bunch of micro decisions. Do I have coffee? Do I take my prenatal vitamins? Do I have a home birth? Do I, have a crib, or do I co-sleep? All these things, all these decisions, and the information isn't necessarily readily available to someone who doesn't have a PhD or a very robust library subscription to get into this academic data. So here's these informations where she has these decisions where she has to, translate a bunch of information and weigh it against the cost, benefits, and her own personal preferences. And to do so, we need to sort of respect her agency, and what falls out of that method is not only taking into account the decision available, but the opportunity cost and the trade-off it implies. Kate says it's also influential what other people think. So she can see outside viewers. And again, that's some of the data we're talking about here. That's some of the information. So that's really all I wanted to discuss today. Just take this very introductory chapter and think about how we can use it to address decision-making in a data-driven world. On Friday, we're going to be talking about what this data looks like more generally when we talk about sort of the role science and replication plays in getting us these data and getting us this information. Any questions, comments, concerns before we call it for the day? All right, well, those of you who haven't sent in your syllabus contracts, make sure you do so before Sunday. The rest of you, have a great day. Like I said, I really had a lot of fun with today's discussion. I hope you did as well. And anyone who has any concerns that they don't want to address in class, please come to me separately. So with that, happy Wednesday, everyone, and we'll regroup here on Zoom Friday morning.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.